This is a production of World Video Bible School. To God be the glory.
When our forefathers came to this country, they were looking for spiritual freedom. Many of them did not really realize the spiritual bondage they were in. They were in bondage to the creeds, the doctrines, the precepts of men. They were in darkness, and they had begun to look for light. My name is Wesley Simons. Join me and others as we tell you the story of the Restoration Movement.
I'm kind of homesick for a country to which I've never been before. No sad goodbyes will there be spoken, for time won't matter anymore. Beulah land, I'm longing for you, and someday on thee I'll stand, where my home shall be eternal. Beulah land, sweet Beulah land.
As we study the Restoration Movement, we love the men and women involved. And I've heard even preachers say our roots are in the Restoration Movement. Oh no, our roots are not in the Restoration Movement. We go back to Acts chapter 2, the church you read about in the Bible. This is the church that we promote. Also, I've known of people that would quote the Restoration preachers as if though this is authoritative. I love the men and women of the Restoration Movement. But in this study, the only thing that will be authoritative is the inspired, inerrant, perfect will of God. As we study the Restoration Movement in America, we'll be looking at four major movements primarily. We'll be looking at Abner Jones, Elias Smith in New England. We'll be looking at James O'Kelly, Rice Haggard in North Carolina. Also Barton Stone in Kentucky. And then we'll also be looking at Alexander Campbell in what was then known as Virginia as we look at the movement there. But Elias Smith was born in Lyme, Connecticut, June 17th, 1769. He became a Baptist preacher. He preached for 11 years for the Baptist Church. He married Mary Burleigh. He believed in the miraculous operation of the Holy Spirit, dreams, visions, anything along that line that would influence him miraculously. He later came to give some of these up as he questioned Calvinism. And he'd preach hard when it came to sin and say to the young people, you shouldn't live in sin. And they'd say, what's the problem? We're among the elect. We're okay, so don't bother us. Well, he really started to study his Bible. And he came to realize that the only way that he is going to get out of this mess was simply go back to the New Testament and do only that which the New Testament taught. He put out a Christian paper, he put out other writings, and he tried to influence the world to say, hey, if we're going to come out of spiritual darkness, we're going to have to go back to the New Testament. That's what the Restoration Movement is all about.
How beautiful heaven must be. How beautiful heaven must be.
In Royalton, Massachusetts, 1772, Dr. Abner Jones was born. Abner Jones was not very religious until about age 21 when he decided it's time to become concerned about God and my soul. That was his attitude. He decided, hey, I'd like to preach a little bit. But what bothered him was he did not know what to preach. He too was steeped in Calvinism. And so he went back to the New Testament and he started to read. The more he read the New Testament, the more he realized Calvinism was wrong. Here's a man who decided, hey, what we need to do is return to the pattern of the Bible. Now, there's a lot of people today that don't feel there is a pattern, but Dr. Abner Jones believed there was. Now, for a while, he practiced medicine, and when he decided to get married, he told his wife-to-be, now here's what you've got to understand. One day I'll return to my country. You'll go with me, or I'll leave you. Not only that, I expect to have 3, 4 children. They'll be running around looking for something to eat. You'll be in rags. And if you can't marry a man like that, then you don't want to marry me. So he practiced medicine for a while. Then he started to preach. The more he preached, the more he realized, hey, something is wrong. And so he was striving more and more to go back to the New Testament. Finally, he established what he called free churches. They decided to call themselves Christians, give up all creeds, and simply go back to the Bible. Now, Abner Jones and Elias Smith didn't make it as far as they needed to go. But this we do know. They were trying to chart a course that no one else had charted, on how to go back to New Testament Christianity. We love them for it, as they were looking for the truth. And they were telling people, let's be Christians. Let's go back to the Bible. Let's give up creeds. Let's give up man-made churches. Thank God for men like that were at least making the plea, we need to go back to the Bible. That's what you need to do. That's what I need to do.
When all stars get singers get home, when never a sorrow or heartaches will come, there'll be no
James O'Kelly and Rice Haggard are very important men in the Restoration movement. The exact birth date of James O'Kelly is not known. Neither do we know where he was born. But there are things that we do know about James O'Kelly. Oh, he was bitterly opposed to slavery. He let that be known privately and from the pulpit. Here is a man who had problems with Francis Asbury. He would confront him on various issues. He wanted to make a break with the Church of England when they met at their great conference in Virginia. Asbury would have no part of it. He wanted preachers to get up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and start their work. Asbury would not endorse it. Here's a man that pushed various issues, and yet Asbury would not buy it. But more and more, the circuit riders were becoming concerned about the circuits they were being given. So when they met again at another conference, James O'Kelly decided to take a stand and tell Francis Asbury that, look, these men need a better circuit. They need a circuit closer to home. They shouldn't have to go so far away from home. Asbury would not buy it. Some of the Methodist preachers pulled out. So then here you've got James O'Kelly, Rice Haggard, leading a group that really didn't know what they were going to call themselves, so they called themselves the Republican Methodist. Now, they called themselves the Republican Methodist to a large degree because they felt like people ought to have a voice. They ought to be able to say what is going to be done here or there. Well, they decided to get together and try to figure out what kind of government this new church was going to have. So they met in Virginia, at Old Lebanon, in Surrey County. And they got together trying to decide, all right, what are we going to call ourselves? Are we going to continue to call ourselves the Republican Methodist? What shall be our creed? How are we going to go about this? Rice Haggard stood up and said, now listen. As he held a Bible up, he said, why don't we just call ourselves what they called themselves in the Bible and be just Christians? They bought that. Another man from North Carolina stood up and said, listen, what we need to do is adopt the Bible as our only creed and do away with creed books. They bought that. They came up with 5 cardinal principles. They decided that Jesus Christ would be the head of the church, and that's the way it must be. They decided that the name Christian would be the name that they would wear. They decided the New Testament would be the standard by which all men were to live. They decided that Christian character and piety would be the only test of fellowship, and then they endorsed something that is called the right to private judgment. Now what they meant by that was that every individual ought to be able to sit down and read his or her Bible and decide from it what God Almighty is saying to them without some man or creed book demanding that you believe doctrine X or doctrine Y. And so then these men, as you see, were on the right trail. They didn't quite get there because James O'Kelly believed in sprinkling until the day he died, and he defended it. But yet they were coming up with precepts that were going to lead men and women back to the Bible. When O'Kelly and Rice Haggard pulled out, it was guesstimated that maybe 6,000 people pulled out with them. But a little bit later, by 1809, it was guesstimated that over 20,000 people had begun to endorse these principles of allowing Jesus Christ to be the head of the church and to simply go back to the Bible and be known as Christians. No doubt they influenced a lot of people, and we're indebted to them. And we too must make up our minds that Jesus Christ is the head of the church, and we're going to go back to the Bible, and we're going to do only what the Word of God says.
When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there.
Barton Stone was born December the 24th, 1772 in Port Tobacco, Maryland. His father died when he was 3 years of age, and his mother moved the family down to the Dan River Valley in Virginia, not very far from the North Carolina line. As a matter of fact, in Barton Stone's autobiography, he said that he and the family could hear cannon fire down at the old Gifford Courthouse during the Revolutionary War. And his mother would send him out from time to time and say, "Go hide the horses, so that neither side will steal them." Well, as Barton got older and he received the inheritance that his father had left for him, he decided he wanted a good education. So he started to look to see where a quality education could be obtained. And he started to look at David Caldwell's Log College. He realized that many governors had been trained there, many lawyers and many statesmen. So he thought this would be a good choice. And so then he moved to North Carolina to become a lawyer or a statesman. He had little or no interest in religion. As a matter of fact, when James McGready came to preach in a meeting there, a revival, he tried to leave. But the storm was so bad he had to come back. And so he listened to McGready. But he couldn't understand the concept that if you were already elected, why be that concerned about it anyway? But he became interested in religion and decided that he too would become a preacher. And so then he decided to take a tour into North Carolina, where he had practically no success. And so something unusual happened. After he had been down to Washington, Georgia, and taught in a school there that was operated by the Methodists, he decided that he would try to go maybe further north. And what happened further north, that is, in Cane Ridge, up in Kentucky, around Lexington, the Cane Ridge Presbyterian Church needed a minister. Why in the world did they need a minister? They needed a minister because Robert Finley, who was preaching there, was being paid with whiskey. They often paid the preachers back in that day and time with whiskey. They had preached, and here's your half a pint of liquor. Well, he decided to use his paychecks. So he decided to drink the whiskey that they were giving to him. So then what do? They bring charges against the man that he's drinking. He brings counter charges against some of the members for libel, but nevertheless he was dismissed. Well, Barton Stone found out about this, and he went to Cane Ridge, and he took the preaching job at Cane Ridge and also at Concord, 5 miles away. And so then he started a great work there, and he often spoke of Cane Ridge as the place that he loved best. He loved the people there. He loved the people of Kentucky. But something else was happening in this country about that time. He noticed some revivals, major revivals happen here or there, drawing thousands of people. He decided to organize one at Cane Ridge. So in 1801, the Cane Ridge revival took place. Now here's what's interesting about this revival. It is a break with Calvinism. He invited various preachers to come. And so these preachers, they came. He invited people from around the area to come. It is estimated by a military man that was used to estimating crowds that there was somewhere between 20 to 30,000 people that showed up at Cane Ridge. And they said if you wanted to see a beautiful sight at night, you should have seen all the campfires and the lanterns that were burning throughout the woods, something like these right here, as all the people had come in to hear the Word of God. Now what would happen, you'd have one preacher maybe who had set up here, another one back over there, and another one back over in this direction, and the crowds would gather around. And Barton Stone and others would preach to these people. And they were telling them, in essence, you can make a decision. You can choose to obey or not obey God. This was a total break with Calvinism. It was against everything that Barton Stone stood for as far as a creed book that he had endorsed. You see, when Barton Stone was asked, when he was being ordained as a Presbyterian minister, do you endorse the confession of faith? He said, only insofar as it is in harmony with the Word of God. Now, Barton didn't know what to think about this himself. He'd see people get down on the ground, and they would bark, or they would roll, or they would be slain as if though they were dead. He said one of the most amazing things that he saw, a man had made fun of all of this. See, Barton didn't know what to think about it. This man made fun of it, and all of a sudden he fell down as if though he were dead. So Barton thought maybe this is the Holy Spirit somehow operating upon these people. Later, these men, Presbyterian ministers, would be called into question for what they did at Cane Ridge. And this revival, a great meeting, was a springboard for the Restoration movement when these men decided, hey, look, we can make a choice to obey God or not obey God. And what we need to do is give up the creeds and the doctrines of men. And when Robert McNamara was being tried, and when Barton Stone and the others saw, hey, this is not going to turn out good, they went out into a garden and they prayed. And they went back and they resigned from the presbytery. And so when they resigned from the presbytery there, they decided to set up the Springfield Presbytery. And when they did that, they made another mistake. And we'll study that too as we study the great Restoration movement.
Be still, my soul, thy best, thy heavenly friend.
Thomas Campbell was born February the 1st, 1763. Thomas was a Annie-Burger, Seceder, Presbyterian. Thomas married Jane Cornego. Their first child was Alexander. At about the age of 20, Thomas went to the University of Glasgow. Here he was influenced by the common sense philosopher Thomas Reid. But more importantly, he was influenced by people that called themselves independents, like the Haldanes, John Glas, Robert Sandeman, Rowland Hill. These individuals were saying, let's get away from creeds, doctrines, let us be just Christians. Thomas Campbell preached for the Rich Hill Presbyterian Church. He preached there about 9 years. He also was an educator. As a matter of fact, of all the men in the Restoration movement, Thomas Campbell was probably the most educated. And so then his health started to fail. And the doctor said, you need to go on a voyage. Well, Alexander Campbell had already served his daddy notice. When I get old enough, I'm going to America. So Thomas Campbell decided that he would come to America. He did come to America, and he wound up in Washington, Pennsylvania. Here, he found people from the old country. He found people that he knew. He was delighted. So then he decided to preach for the Chartiers Presbytery. And they ordained him. And so he went out and started to preach, but he soon got into trouble. He was serving the Lord's Supper to different kinds of Presbyterians. He thought if a man was a Christian, why should he not be able to partake of the Lord's Supper? So he was put on trial for various things and found to be guilty. And he first thought, well, I'll resign. No, he said, I'll stay in. He tried to stay in. They gave him some more preaching appointments, but not many. He knew that they were giving him the cold shoulder. So he got out. When he got out, some others walked out with him. So they formed the Christian Association of Washington. Now, this was not a church. What this was a Bible study group. And he wanted some recognition for it. As a matter of fact, again, he tried to associate himself with the Presbyterians, and no, they'd have no part of it. So they were trying to decide what their philosophy should be. How are we going to go about Bible study? What's going to be what we believe? Well, they commissioned Thomas Campbell to sit down and write what is now known as the Declaration and Address, one of the greatest pieces of literature that has come out of the Restoration movement. In it, he condemns division. He condemns the concept of following the precepts of men. He promotes concepts like private judgment. Over and over in the writings of the Restoration men, you'll see them promoting the concept of private judgment. Now, what they mean by that is simply this: I ought to be able to read the Bible for myself and draw only those conclusions which are warranted by the evidence. So when he wrote the Declaration and Address, now they got him a road map. Now they know kind of where they're going. But they realized as long as they stayed simply the Christian Association of Washington, that no one was going to have anything to do with them. So they established the Brush Run Church, where Thomas Campbell became an elder, and Alexander, once he got to America, was the minister. Here's what's amazing about the story. Jane, the wife of Thomas, and all the children, including Alexander, they're still back in Ireland. They're trying to make a journey to America. Now, Thomas has come to the conclusion, I can no longer be a Presbyterian. I'm not going to be associated with them any longer. But he's not told his family. Well, the family takes off from Ireland trying to make it to America, but the ship runs aground. Now it's got a leak. Looks like they're going to lose their lives, but they're saved. And so at Scotland, they run into a cousin that helps take them in. And they can't go during the wintertime because that's not going to be commodious. So Alexander Campbell stays in Scotland and goes to the University of Glasgow. Now he is being influenced by Greville Ewan, the Haldanes, John Glas, Robert Sandeman, and others. And so one of the things they did in that day and time that's unique, to partake of the Lord's Supper, you had to take a test. The elders of the Presbyterian Church would come and set you down, and they'd ask you one question after another. The last question was usually, are you at peace with your neighbor? If you passed the test, they'd give you a token. And then when it came time for the Lord's Supper, you'd have to show the token to have the right to partake of the Lord's Supper. Alexander Campbell passed the test. Here he is getting ready to partake of the Lord's Supper. He takes his token, tosses it on the table, turns and walks out. He does not partake of the Lord's Supper. For all practical purposes, this is his breaking his ties with the Presbyterian Church. You see, he had been going to independent churches where they were saying, let's go back to the Bible. Let's be just Christians. He had bought into it. But how in the world was he going to tell his daddy? His daddy was a Presbyterian preacher. And so then finally, the ship makes it to America. They get off in New York. They make their way, stay in New York for a couple of 3 days, seeing the city. They go to Philadelphia. Then they start out to Washington, Pennsylvania. But Thomas is found out there in the United States. He starts out to meet them. And so halfway in between Philadelphia and Washington, Pennsylvania, they meet. But how was Thomas going to tell his family, I'm not a Presbyterian? How was Alexander going to tell Thomas, I'm not a Presbyterian any longer? Finally, they met, they embraced, and Thomas said to Alexander, I got something I want you to read. What he had in his saddlebags were the proofs of the Declaration and Address. He said, I want you to read this. The first thing, as far as we know, that Alexander Campbell read when he came to America was the Declaration and Address. He read that, and he said to his father, I can give the rest of my life promoting these principles. And he said, I don't plan to take any money for it either. And Thomas said, son, I'm afraid you'll wear many a ragged coat with that concept. Well, he didn't wear many a ragged coat because he married into money. He married Margaret Brown. And we'll tell the rest of the story of how Alexander Campbell pushed, promoted the Restoration Movement, and did a beautiful job trying to call people back to the Word of God.
That will be glory for.
John Raccoon Smith was born in Sullivan County, Tennessee. At the age of 11, his family moved him into Kentucky. John Smith was not a well-educated man. Many of the men in the Restoration Movement were well-educated, but not John Raccoon Smith. Here is a man, when he moved into Kentucky, he wanted to try to make something out of himself. He bought a farm for $50. He started to go to school to a Mr. Farrell. And he'd go over there and he'd work at his shop and trying to pay his way through school. And then by the light of a fireplace, he would study. And this is what little education that he himself received. Well, here's a man that wanted to be a child of God first and foremost, but he was steeped in Calvinism. That's what he'd been taught. He'd go out and lay on the ground and try his best to seek some kind of experience from God. But the experience was not forthcoming. On one occasion, a great feeling came over him of relief. And so he went to the Baptist church and told them of this experience. They accepted him. Well, he started to meet with the Baptists, and so he was doing a little study with them. They wanted him to teach and preach. They tried to encourage him to do this. On one occasion when he was going to preach, he became so nervous as he stood up, his thoughts sat down. He went running out the side door and he fell. And he thought, if I don't get up and go back in there, I'll never do it. So he got up and he went back in there. And he spoke. He wanted to be a preacher so badly, but he had no experience. He couldn't tell them that God had truly called him. So he related two experiences. How that he was saved from the goring of a bull and delivered from a rattlesnake. And when they heard this, they accepted this as experience and proof that this man ought to be preaching the Word of God. Now, John Raccoon Smith, as he would go forth and proclaim what he understood to be right, often found himself confused. As a matter of fact, on one occasion, he stood up before his audience to preach, and he said, "People, I am in darkness. I do not understand some of these things, and I need to rethink them." Well, we appreciate the honesty of John Raccoon Smith, but a little bit before this, he decided to go to Huntsville, Alabama. He took his wife, Ann Townsend, children, and went down to Huntsville. He is out trying to preach. His wife, Ann, was over trying to take care of a neighbor, when all of a sudden a fire broke out in their log cabin, and Eli and Elvira were burned to death. This devastated John Raccoon Smith. As he got back, he remembered how hard it was when he saw his wife seated there, and he saw people trying to retrieve parts of the body from the fire. He said he took his wife and he walked off in the woods and he tried to give her some consolation. But how could he? He believed in hardcore Calvinism. And he thought, surely those children that died in that fire are not also in the devil's hell. And he tried to talk to his wife, but he could find little or no way to give her comfort. As he started to think about his innocent children, he really got to look into Calvinism. And one thing that helped him, he started to read the Christian Baptist, a publication put out by Alexander Campbell. He is much impressed. He heard that Alexander Campbell was coming to Kentucky, and he wanted to go hear him. So he got on his old horse and he rode 20 miles to hear Alexander Campbell speak. And when Campbell got through, he was totally disappointed. He said to the man next to him, "Mr. Vaughn, I rode my horse 20 miles to hear this man, and he had the gall to get up there and speak for 30 minutes. He said, "I'll tell you what you do. You look at your watch." He looked at his watch, of course, would have been a pocket watch back then, and he'd been speaking 2.5 hours. Alexander Campbell spoke on the allegory of Hagar and in the book of Galatians chapter 4. And John Smith told Alexander Campbell, "You have shed more light on the scriptures in this one sermon than all the sermons I've heard in my life." He rode back with Alexander Campbell and they discussed the scriptures. And it wasn't long until John Smith was leaving the Baptist church to promote the concept, let's go back to Christianity. Let's be just Christians. We're much indebted to this man. No, he didn't have the education of Thomas or Alexander Campbell. He wasn't educated like Walter Scott or Barton Stone. He is just a common, down-to-earth type guy that believed in one book, the Bible, and telling people we need to go back to the one book. This man, through teaching God's Word, actually baptized thousands of people. And it was he that was very instrumental in helping to join the forces of Campbell and Stone. At the old Hill Street building in Lexington, Kentucky, he delivered that great speech which said, "Let's no longer be New Lights, Old Lights, Stoneites. Let's be known simply as Christians." He extended his right hand, representing Campbell and his people, and on the other side, Barton Stone extended his right hand. Barton said, "As I did that, my hand trembled." And here these two forces unite to promote Christian unity and to go out throughout all America proclaiming the concept of let's go back to the Bible, let's be just Christians. The study of the Restoration Movement is indeed a great study. We've given you just a little bit of background knowledge on the four major movements here in America so that hopefully you can deepen your knowledge in the Restoration Movement. And maybe someday you'll get to take a restoration tour so that you can see all these wonderful sites where these men were involved in their work. You might say, "Well, I doubt that I'll ever get to take a tour like that." Oh, yes, you will. We're fixing to take you on that tour. We want you to see where these men worked, where they lived, where they suffered, and where they enjoyed many wonderful blessings from God Almighty. Let us start our study in a place that was known back then as Washington, Kentucky, where Alexander Campbell went and debated McCullough. Joining me there will be Paul Vaughn, and Paul will help us have a greater understanding of what took place in that area. You ready? Let's go join Paul Vaughn on site.
Wesley, we're in Mason County, Kentucky, and in particular Maysville. This part of Maysville used to be called Washington. They call it Old Washington now, and it's very significant for the amount of history that's in this area. The first post office in the frontier was here in Washington, Kentucky. It was here in Washington, Kentucky that Albert Sidney Johnston was born, one of the generals at Shiloh. And I thought that was significant because across the river in Georgetown, Ohio, about 20 miles, that's where Ulysses S. Grant grew up. And both of these boys grew up close to each other, but yet it was Johnston that was the general of the Southern Army in Shiloh, and then Grant certainly defeated Johnston there. But you know, what I'm more interested in is the restoration history that's in this area. There is so much that is between here and in Maysville and Mason County, and you go up into Bourbon County, into Cane Ridge, into Lexington, where the College of the Bible was located. That in Mason County is where McNamara, he was one of the signers of the last will and testament of the Springfield Presbytery, that he lived in this area, preached here in Washington, preached at Cabin Creek. And it's very significant that Alexander Campbell had one of his debates here in this area.
You know, when Thomas and Alexander left the Presbyterians, I'm sure, Paul, they didn't anticipate all of the controversy that was going to arise as a result of that. What was the view of Thomas and Alexander Campbell and Barton Stone toward debating?
Barton Stone and Thomas Campbell didn't like the ideal of debating. They thought it caused problems, and they didn't believe that if you debated that you could show the type of Christian character that needed to be exhibited. And that stopped Alexander for a while from debating, but he finally did get into debating. And this is the place of his second debate with W.L. McCullough.
Okay. This ravine area, isn't this somewhere back in here where they think the debate occurred?
Okay. Well, we don't know exactly, but we do know that it was in a ravine here at Washington, and this kind of sets the description of where the debate was held. So it could have been here, it could not, but it seems as though that it was in this area right in here is where the debate was held, and right close to the cemetery. This is the old Washington Cemetery that we're standing in, and certainly this area here would have been cleaned out because there are graves that date back, precede the Campbell-McCullough debate. So this area was certainly been used quite a bit in that time.
Yeah, you know what's amazing, Paul? When these men started coming out of denominationalism, and when they started adopting slogans like, "We'll speak where the Bible speaks and we'll remain silent where the Bible is silent," they did not realize where it was going to take them. For instance, when Margaret and Alexander had their first child, Jane, they weren't sure about whether the baby ought to be sprinkled or not. But they grew through a study of the Scriptures to understand that, and so much so that now Campbell can come here and show McCullough and the audience it's just not scriptural.
The subject of baptism itself, well, you take Barton Stone. It was 7 years after he professed being a Christian before he and the congregation at Cane Ridge was baptized. Rice Haggart was part of that group, and Haggart was the one that influenced Stone to wear the name Christian. Well, it took a period of time for Haggart to realize that he needed to be baptized for the remission of sins. But once they grew, and they were growing, and you can see that these people here, they were reading their Bibles, and I think that was the key. They realized that they had been following traditions and creeds of men, and they just started going back to New Testament Christianity, and they started shedding these doctrines of men. And it took them, it just didn't happen overnight. It took a few years, and maybe they didn't completely shed everything all through their life. But, you know, here in Mason County, I grew up in this county. This is the county where I was born. That's why it's so important to me about the restoration history. At one time, when Stone and Campbell preached here, Pinkerton preached here, D.S. Burnett, which certainly they were liberals, and a lot of their influence led these congregations astray. At one time, there were 10 churches of Christ in the county.
You know, it's amazing, Paul, how that if we don't keep teaching the truth, people soon forget. These men, like I said a moment ago, when they decided to go back to the Bible and do what the Bible said, they did not realize where it was going to lead them. And when they finally got there and started teaching the truth, then it was each had a God-given obligation to keep passing that down so that each generation would know the truth. And you can go into areas where the Restoration movement once was strong, and you can find that liberalism has taken over and men are shackled again with the creeds and the doctrines of men.
Well, if you think about it, in Lexington, Kentucky, which is only 60 miles to the west of here, that's where the College of the Bible was. That's where, quote, all the important men in the Brotherhood generally were, McGarvey and those guys, and they had a great influence. But yet, within a generation and a half, they started falling away.
Yeah, that's why it's important to stay in the book. Here's the way old Washington would have looked during the days of the Campbell-McCullough debate. There's a historical section in town where you can go and see old buildings like this Presbyterian church building established in 1792. Richard McNamara, one of the signers of the last will and testament of the Springfield Presbytery, preached here.
Sorrow and pain will all have flown.
You know, Paul, even though Alexander was a little reluctant to debate to start with, he came to realize the importance of debating. Now, we've looked at the site of the Campbell-McCullough debate. Tell us some of the good results that came out of that.
Okay. Now, as a result of that debate at Washington, and we're about 10 miles from that spot, heading west, and then this is Mays Lick, Kentucky, that there was a Baptist church which is located about a quarter of a mile from here, and at that point in time in history, it was the largest Baptist church in Kentucky. They had 700 members. There was a preacher by the name of Warden, or Warder, I believe it's the way it's pronounced, that was there, and he had 500 new converts. Well, the Baptists liked the idea of this preacher from West Virginia coming and teaching about baptism. So they invited Campbell to come out and preach. Well, he began to preach. Not only did he preach, but they also subscribed to the Christian Baptist, which was another instrument to use to teach New Testament Christianity. Well, after a couple of years, and this was in 1828, that there was a division that came about in this Baptist church of 700 because of Campbell and what he taught as far as going back to the New Testament. And the Baptists in the congregation were afraid that those who were, quote, reformers, they call them reformers at that time, were going to take over the congregation. So they got together and they came up with this resolution that all the members of the Mays Lick Baptist Church had to sign that they would support the Confession of Faith. Well, the reformers couldn't do that. In fact, there was your line of division right there. They had 700 members. The reformers were close to outnumbering the Baptists, and this is why they went to such drastic means. In fact, even the Baptists in the area thought that wasn't wise in what they did to run off the people that were trying to go back to the Bible. And so they signed this, so there was a split, and for a period of time there was 2 Baptist churches. Well, they went to the Bracken Association to see which one they was going to recognize as a Baptist church, and the Baptists outnumbered the Reformers. So we figure there were 700, and we figure maybe that out of that, the Reformers, or those trying to follow going back to the Bible, were maybe about 250 to 300. So that's how close to the numbers were. And all this happened within 2.5, 3 years after the Campbell-McCullough debate. Well, after that, the Baptist Bracken Association, they took the ones that had the biggest numbers. And then the Church of Christ was formed here at Mays Lick with about 250. And all this came about just because of the debate. And you're starting a congregation with 250 members. And this congregation is rich in history too. In fact, Wesley, their first full-time preacher in 1850 was Walter Scott. They hired him for a sum of $550 a year. That was a lot of money.
That's right.
But he was a full-time preacher here, and Scott met two of his wives, Natty Allen. He married her here, and she lived for about 4 years and passed away. And then he married a Sandage lady, and she wasn't too good to him. She was rich, and she liked to keep her money. And Walter Scott liked to give money away. In fact, he was of that temperament. If someone needed something, he'd give them the last coin he had in his pocket. Scott was coming back from a speaking engagement once, and I think they gave him like a $20 gold piece for the speaking engagement. And walking down the road, some boy came up and asked him for some change. Well, Scott just reached in his pocket and gave him his $20 gold piece. And the preacher was with him. I says, "Do you know what you just give that boy?" And he goes, "No." See, he was that type of individual. Even with his first marriage, they had 2 cows, and someone needed a cow, so he gave them a cow. Family thought it was all right, except he gave them the cow that had the cowbell on it, so it made it harder on them to locate their cow. But he was preacher here. The widow Sandage liked her money, and she didn't like Scott giving it away. And one time, she pushed him out of the house. And he ended up going to Cincinnati for a few days. Now, this is just what, was said. And the brethren here went down to get him. And they said, "Brother Scott, you need to come home." And they said, "I will if you'll go with me." And that's just the type of attitude and type of person she was. And we're going to go up to Scott's grave here in a second and look at it, and also see the house where he lived at with the widow Sandage.
Yeah. Paul, I've read where it wasn't unusual to see Walter Scott out sleeping on the porch or going from house to house trying to get his breakfast for the morning because he is free-hearted and his third wife wasn't.
That's exactly it. And that wasn't a very happy marriage for him.
That's sad, isn't it?
Sure is.
As beautiful as marriage is supposed to be, for Scott to wind up married with that kind of relationship toward the end of his life. We are in the cemetery here at Mays Lick where Walter Scott is buried. Walter Scott was born October the 31st, 1796. He died in 1861, Paul, and there's an interesting story about that he saw the coming of the Civil War, and it broke his heart. And many who knew him up close and personal believe that's what killed him. But that's really not all that unusual. He was a highly emotional man. And his family was that way to some degree. When his father had gone out of town and suddenly had a heart attack and died, and news was carried back to his mother Mary. She died suddenly, and they were buried in a common grave. So it doesn't really shock me that this man could die of heartbreak. He loved this country. He loved the brotherhood. And it broke his heart to think that one American would take up arms against another. He saw it coming. Or that one child of God would do that. And so he loved the church. Now, with that in mind, you might want to tell us a little bit more about the history of the church here that he loved so dearly.
It's interesting to know at that time period when you was talking about the Civil War and the storms that were on the horizon that Scott saw, that maybe you have read or remember reading the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. We'll see the slave girl crossing the Ohio River on ice to go up to the Rankin house is only about 15 miles from here, and that was in that book. So certainly the Civil War had a whole lot to play with Scott's attitude because he loved this country so very much. Now, the church itself, during the time of Scott and afterwards, basically a sound congregation. Now, in 1849, at the forming of the Missionary Society, just a year before Scott moved here, he was there to president at that first convention of the Missionary Society. But up until the time of 1898, and that's when the congregation brought instrumental music into the worship. It started out like it did in many of the congregations in this part of Kentucky and Ohio, that they didn't bring the instrument directly into the worship service. They started in the classrooms. And they would have the instrument in the classrooms, and when that generation got to adults, they just brought it right into the auditorium. And that's what happened here at Mays Lick, except it was held off in the worship service by one lady, Julia Longnecker. And she kept the instrument out of the worship service until 1898, and she passed away. They brought it in then. And that church today has gone into the ultra-liberal wing of the disciples of Christ today. And they would not even believe the inspiration of the Bible or in the miracles and things like that. In Louisville, Kentucky, just a few years ago, the disciples had a convention, and someone brought up the resolution that to be saved, you must believe in Jesus Christ. Well, that resolution failed. But that just goes to show you how things evolve, that once people start leaving that restoration plea of speaking as the oracles of God, that it's not too long till they've gone so long that they think someone can be saved without even believing in Jesus. But there is, like I say, a lot of history here. Walter Scott's home, you can see it here from the graveyard. It's just right across the road. Would you like to walk over and look at it?
Yeah, let's go look at that, Paul.
Okay.
The home of Walter Scott was built in 1828 by John Foxworthy. Here Walter lived with his third wife, Eliza. In this home lived one of the greatest orators of the Restoration movement. He'd often ride up in front of a school and teach little children the 5-finger exercise on how to become a child of God. Near the old Cane Ridge Meeting House is Stoner Creek. Here Barton Warren Stone baptized people into Christ. People like David Purvance, Reuben Dooley, and others. After these men were baptized, they used beautiful Stoner Creek as their baptistry.
When I've gone the last mile of this way, I will rest at the close of the day, and I know there are joys that await me when I've gone the last mile of the way.
The next stop on our tour, one of the most interesting of all, the old Cane Ridge Meeting House.
I am sure He will show me His glory when I've gone the last mile of the way. When I've gone the last mile of the way.
We are at the old Cane Ridge Meeting House, 8 miles outside of Paris, Kentucky. Joining me today, Dion and Robert Steffer, co-curators here at Cane Ridge. Now, if you want to come and enjoy a good trip and them take you around and tell you some great facts about the old meeting house, Barton Stone, and other things, they'll be glad to do it. And right now, we're going to ask them to share some of those facts with us.
We're delighted to have you here with us today, Wesley. We're standing in the graveyard of the old Cane Ridge Meeting House. This land was surveyed by Daniel Boone, and when he did his surveying, he identified this ridge as the Cane Ridge. So the ridge came to have its name first, and then came the meeting house after that as the Cane Ridge Presbyterian Church. The graveyard is an old graveyard. We're standing in a section that puts us very near the grave of Barton Warren Stone. Over here, this white obelisk was cleaned in 1991 in celebration of the 200th anniversary of the building of the meeting house, and so that's about as white as we're going to see it in the next century. And there are other graves of interest in the area, and then there's an area right here where you don't see any graves at all. At least there's no markers, and yet it is a full graveyard. That we do know. And then right in front of us here is the stone superstructure that covers the old log meeting house. We're kind of amused that sometimes people drive up the drive and they slow down and they look and they're expecting to find that it's this stone church, and they think they've followed the wrong directions and they keep on going, never realizing that you have to go through the doors, and then inside you find that great treasure, that pearl of great price, that old log church. You want to tell us something about Barton's
Yes, I would like
grave
to.
here?
When Barton was buried here, he'd been buried 2 other times. He was first buried in Jacksonville, Illinois, on his farm where he lived. You know that Barton was a man of not many means. He was a person who had to always have a job farming as well as the ministry and the educating and the publishing that he was doing. So he died in Hannibal, Missouri, at the home of his daughter, and then he was buried in Jacksonville twice. After the farm was sold, he was buried in the cemetery, and then he was brought here in 1847, and this marker, this obelisk you see, was erected at that time to honor him and give him a prominent place in this cemetery. Incidentally, we like to tell people that Barton Warren Stone died at the home of his daughter, and his grandchildren were the playmates of Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain. And it's interesting that Mark Twain once called Will Bowen, Barton's grandson, his oldest and dearest friend, and it's thought that he is the prototype for Huckleberry Finn. One of the things that's interesting about this cemetery is that we have a lot of ledger stones. Now, these stones that you see are solid stones. They're made to look like coffins. They even have a lid on them, but the lid is just carved out of a solid piece of limestone. And they are unique to this country. They are sometimes found in Europe, and this is the only place in Kentucky where you see these ledger stones. And the ledger, of course, was the inscription of the person who was buried there. Underneath the stone is the actual burial of the individuals, and that's a unique feature of this. And one of the persons that is buried with a ledger stone over her is Barton Stone's first wife, Eliza. She died in 1810, and she was brought over here in 1930 from a farm where Barton Stone had his farm at this place, this farm in Kentucky. Now, Eliza is buried with a ledger stone and marker, and then just beyond the graveyard then stands the superstructure. And Dion, do you want to say some things about the superstructure?
Right. The superstructure is built of Cane Ridge golden limestone. It has a slate roof. What we can see from the outside are windows that look blue in color, and in the center of each of the sets of windows you see some sort of patterning. Well, those are stained glass windows that are more clearly visible, of course, from the inside, and they tell the story of the founding of not just the Cane Ridge Church, but also the Christian Church in the 3 branches of the Christian Church. The superstructure was started in 1954, not to make anything more beautiful necessarily, but because with the restoration of the meeting house in 1932, when the siding was removed, that exposed those log walls to attack from woodpeckers and the weather. And in the course of 20 years, people began to notice rather rapid deterioration in the quality of the old church. And so experts were called in, and they were asked what was happening and what could be done about it. And they said, well, you've got 2 choices. You leave the old church uncovered and let it go down to the attacks of the woodpeckers and the weather, or you cover it over. Well, the largest one-room log structure on the continent in the early 50s, you couldn't throw a tarpaulin over a building that size, and so a permanent building had to be erected. And so we're looking at several years of efforts of fundraising on behalf of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Kentucky, with the leadership of the Cane Ridge Preservation Project. And it took a lot of fundraising efforts, and in time $110,000 was raised, and that was just about the final cost for the superstructure. From where we're standing in the graveyard, you can see one long, looks like maybe latticed window. From the inside of the shrine, you can see that there are glass louvered panes in that window. There are 4 of those windows, 2 at each end, and those glass louvers stay open all the time. And so whatever is happening outside blows in. And if it's damp outside, it's going to be damp inside. And that helps keep the old church healthy. It's part of keeping the wood healthy. When the cornerstone was laid in 1954, the master stone mason built from the cornerstone over window height to the front door. And he was doing such beautiful, meticulous work, and the committee began to be fearful that they would never live long enough to see the end of that work. And so they suggested that in the next year, they bring in expert advice. And so that's what they did. They got in professional team of black stonemasons from New York to build the superstructure during the building seasons of 1955, 1956, and everything was finished up and it was dedicated in 1957.
Wesley, we need to talk about this wonderful log structure on the inside here. As you come in the door, you notice the door is a little short. Now stop and think that we had Scottish people who originally came from this place, and Scottish people oftentimes are noted as being tall people. And the reason that the door is short is this is actually the 4th floor. There was first a dirt floor, and then there was a tongue and groove floor, punch and log floor, I should say, and then a tongue and groove floor, and then this final floor from 1882 that we walk on today, or what we call the new floor. And every time another floor was added, then the door had to be made shorter. Now, as you look around this room here, you see a balcony, and you see this gallery or balcony held the black members of the congregation. From 1795, this congregation here, when it was Presbyterian and then a Church of Christ or Christian church, became known for its anti-slavery position. Robert Finley, the second minister of the church before Barton came, was a person who was an anti-slavery person. In our museum, we have a famous letter that Barton Stone wrote to a pastor in Paris, Kentucky, showing his distaste for slavery. And he filed papers of manumission to free 2 slaves that he had inherited from his mother, in fact. So this congregation, and because this was just after the American Revolution, and because of the democratic spirit that was very much alive in our country, and with our theological positions of congregations making their own decisions for themselves, as espoused by Barton Warren Stone and others in the Last Will and Testament of the Springfield Presbytery and other documents and teachings, the black members were educated into the ways of the church. So from this church here and from this gallery, there went elders and deacons to form other congregations, black congregations. And to this day, there are those black congregations that are in the immediate neighborhood here that had their start from Cane Ridge. Well, they didn't really need this gallery, and so from 1829 there was a remodeling. You know, this church was built in the last part of the 18th century, and these people were beginning to think a little more upscale, as we would call it, and so they decided they would remodel their church. They took out this gallery, and they stored it in a barn and used it for a hayloft. There's evidence of some of these posts that are here, which have 8 sides and have been nicely turned and done by the original builders. There's evidence that you can see from the burn marks and the pegs that have been sawed off, where this was used in a barn as a hayloft for 103 years. This was out of this building. they put a ceiling underneath these massive old beams, and they also improved their seating. And then in 1882 was a second time, 50 years later, where they made the building look a little bit better. They brought in this organ, they brought in pews that we're sitting on today, and they also removed the great pulpit that had stood for so many years and had heard the sermons of so many of our Restoration Stone Campbell leaders through the years, including Alexander Campbell, who had visited here. They removed that pulpit in 1882 and put it across the road in a barn, and so it was then stored away. And in 1932, in the restoration of the building, the white siding that had covered the building, the plaster, and you can see white stripes all over the inside of this building where the plaster bled through onto these wonderful old blue ash logs. And they removed all of that and brought the gallery out of the barn where it had been stored for 103 years. And at that time, the building was basically put back the way that it was in 1791, and certainly it's basically the way that Barton Stone and the others would have seen the building, with the exception of these pews, and also with the exception of our short doors that we have here.
Wesley, we're here in the cemetery at Cane Ridge, and as we were walking around the area, and it's certainly a beautiful area to come and spend some time, we came upon this tombstone here that has a very interesting inscription on it. What do you think about that?
Paul, I think it's really unusual. William Rogers. It says he lived and he died. That's not unusual. What is unusual, it says right here that he united himself with the Church of Christ here at Cane Ridge in 1807. Now, there are those who make the argument that Alexander Campbell started the Church of Christ. When did Campbell come to America?
It wasn't until 1809.
Doesn't sound like he started the Church of Christ, did he?
No, in fact, there were people that were wearing the name Christian long before Campbell came here. In fact, there were people wearing the name Christian in Kentucky before the Cane Ridge Revival here in 1801. In 1800, David Haggard moved to Cumberland, Kentucky, and he's listed on the court records there as the preacher for the Christian church, or a preacher for the people called Christians. And that there is 4 years before the last will and testament of Springfield Presbytery. And I thought that's interesting, but yet there are a lot that try to say that Alexander Campbell started the, quote, Church of Christ denomination. Well, the Church of Christ is not a denomination.
That's right.
That's just the Bible and the New Testament, and evidently this William Rogers and his family understood that.
Yes. Paul, people in America today, and even the world, can hardly think of the church without thinking about denominationalism. Isn't it great to be a member of the church that goes all the way back to Pentecost?
Simply going back to New Testament Christianity, taking the Bible and nothing else, and that's what Stone fought for.
That's right. Paul, when Alexander Campbell came here and saw this marker, erected the Barton Stone, he loved him, appreciated very much the effort he was putting forth to restore New Testament Christianity, and then he read this: minister of the gospel of Christ and the distinguished reformer of the 19th century. And then he said, it should read, one of the distinguished reformers of the 19th century. What does that say to you?
Wesley, that is very interesting because that shows us a little bit about human characteristics, how sometimes pride gets into our life. And certainly Campbell and Stone, they loved one another, but there were also at times prideful situations got between them. I know at one time when they were working together to publish a Christian hymnal, and Stone wanted to call it by one name and Campbell wanted to call it another. Well, in the process of time, before they could get together and finally iron out the name, well, Alexander Campbell went ahead and published the hymnal and called it the name he wanted to call it. But with that in mind, too, one of the characteristics of Barton Stone, which I think we can all learn from, that they asked about his opinion of Alexander Campbell. And Stone says, well, his nose points a little bit to the north. meaning he was a little bit arrogant. But he said, my love for him is going to blind my eyes to it. And certainly this is one thing that we need to remember, that yes, sometimes people disappoint us. And these early restoration leaders, they were far from perfect by no means, and we certainly don't want to lead anyone astray and trying to give them honor where honor is not due. But certainly there's a lot we can learn from them. And the thing that we can learn from Barton W. Stone is Christian love.
Let's go look at some other things here on the inside. Paul, here's a superstructure that covers this great Cane Ridge meeting house. When did you say the meeting house was built?
In 1791, when the meeting house was built. And of course, it was built as a Presbyterian church, and Barton Stone was the third preacher here. But like you say, it is certainly a big log cabin.
Hey, let's go in and look at this log cabin.
Okay.
Paul, what great events took place here at Cane Ridge?
Well, I think one of the most significant events in the restoration history was the signing of the last will and testament of the Springfield Presbytery. But before that, the great Cane Ridge revival.
Paul, you mentioned something about these revivals. What were these revivals all about?
Well, in the latter part of the 1700 and the first part of the 1800, a great revival movement kind of moved across the areas of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Ohio. They started in Logan County with James McGrady. Well, Barton Stone heard about this, and he went down to see what it was all about. And so the Cane Ridge was just one of the many revivals, though it was, shall we say, the zenith of all the revivals, simply for the amount of population. We just came up from Mason County. Well, there in Cabin Creek, they had a great revival just a few months before the one here at Cane Ridge, but it wasn't as many people. But in 1801, when the Cane Ridge revival was done here, it is estimated that there was somewhere between 20 and 30,000 people that attended this revival. Now, we're in the meeting house here, but actually none of the preaching was done in the meeting house. In fact, there were so many people that they were camped out all around this canebrake area. And it's interesting to know that this was kind of ecumenical revival, because let's say over here in one part of the camp there would be a Baptist preacher preaching, and over here a Methodist preacher, and then over here a Presbyterian preacher. Now, none of these had anything to do as far as relating to being a preacher for the church, because at that point in time they were not thinking of that. The revival itself, kind of Stone didn't know what to make of it. He was interested in it, and he certainly went and planned this one here at Cane Ridge, but he just didn't know what to think, because they were doing some strange things. They had some different exercises during the revivals. They had the barks, the jerks, the shakes, the falling down like they're dead. And Stone thought it was something of God. And it's much like the Pentecostal revival meetings you see today, where it's just rampant emotionalism. That's all it is. Well, during this Cane Ridge revival, they had all these different preachers preaching, and like we say, there was 20 to 30,000 people, it is estimated. And, well, that got word back to the Transylvania Presbytery. And they didn't like Stone inviting the Baptists and the Methodists in to preach. So, because of this is where problems started that eventually led up to the Springfield Presbytery. Because they told Stone this cannot happen. In fact, some of the preachers, just shortly after that, there was a revival in Paris, and Stone went to see it. And there was a Presbyterian preacher. He was really coming down hard on the revival movement, and also having the different preachers involved in it. And that certainly, that bothered Stone, because he couldn't see, what was going on with it at that time. So that in itself, the revival meeting with the different preachers, set up Stone to the point to where he was pulling away from denominationalism. It's interesting to note about Stone. When he came here, he was not an ordained Presbyterian preacher. And in the latter part of 1700, he went before the presbytery to be ordained. Well, he had a problem. He could not say that he supported the Westminster Confession of Faith. In fact, Stone at that point said that he wished that all creeds could be thrown away. He had one desire, and that was to seek truth. And he said that he was willing to sacrifice everything to find and to know truth. Well, that was his mindset. And I think that's what opened him up to being able to seek out the old paths, to go back to the Bible. Well, at his ordination, there were those there, and they asked him if he supported the Westminster Confession of Faith. Well, they knew what he was going to say because they knew that he didn't support it. And he talked to them ahead of time. And he says, well, I will support it as long as it is consistent with the Word of God. Well, they accepted that. Now, why did they accept that? Only they know. But nevertheless, they ordained Stone a Presbyterian preacher, and then after that, the Cane Ridge Revival came about.
Paul, let's talk about what got these men in trouble. Now, here they were, preaching to the people here, plus they invited denominational preachers in. What was so bad about that?
Wesley, the main problem was the Presbyterian Synod. They had the Westminster Confession of Faith, and that didn't allow man to choose. And certainly when this revival meeting was going on, preachers were preaching to choose to obey God or choose not to obey God, and that did away with Calvinism in much respect. So this is what got them into the problem. And it took 2 or 3 years to finally they had to break away from the Presbyterian Synod. But they formed another one. Go ahead.
Sorry, Paul. It's my understanding that the Presbyterians tolerated this for a little while, hoping that some of these, quote, converts would come over to the Presbyterians. When it didn't happen the way they thought it was going to happen, then didn't they start putting some of these men on trial?
Sure did. In fact, some of the associates with Stone were put on trial. They put them on for teaching things contrary to the Presbyterian doctrine. It only went for a short period of time before the static or the problem from the Presbyterian Church came about, because they were simply afraid they were going to start losing members to different denominations.
You know, Paul, they tried Richard McNamara. And while they were trying him, Barton Stone said he saw what was going to happen. So when they took a break, they went out into a garden. These men that had been involved in the Cane Ridge meeting, and they prayed. And they decided that the thing to do would be just to resign from the presbytery. That's a pretty good thought, is it not?
Well, it is if they didn't go and start another one. And that's exactly what they did. See, they don't have the mindset at this time of coming out of denominationalism. It's 1803, it's September. McNamara's put on trial. They can see the signs that if they put McNamara out, that the Stone and Marshall and Thompson are next. And so they went out and had this prayer. And they resigned from the presbytery, but instead of going into New Testament Christianity at that time, in 1803, they formed the Springfield Presbytery. Let's talk about that. Well, let's sit down here a second.
Okay. All right, Paul, the Springfield Presbytery was established. Was it growing?
It was growing. In fact, they were converting congregations, and especially the congregations where they preached. But an interesting thing happened in about a year. In 1804, they met here at Cane Ridge, and they saw the fallacy of what they were doing. In other words, they complained about the Westminster Confession of Faith. They saw that that was not scriptural. They knew that creeds, the only thing creeds did was to divide people. And then they went and formed another presbytery. So they wrote a will. In other words, they put to death the Springfield Presbytery. And the last will and testament of the Springfield Presbytery is one of the great documents of Restoration history. In fact, I think we ought to read it and maybe glean some information from it.
Okay, why don't we go with that point by point, because I'm sure many in the viewing audience have never heard it, and I think this would be real interesting.
Certainly. In fact, it'd be a good place to read it from up here in the pulpit where Stone preached from.
All right, let's do it.
Let's go.
Paul, let's talk about the last will and testament of the Springfield Presbytery, okay? I want to read part of it, and you and I can comment, and then you can read part if you want to. Notice it says, the Presbytery of Springfield, sitting at Cane Ridge, they were right here, in the county of Bourbon, being through a gracious providence and more than ordinary bodily health, growing in strength and size daily, and in perfect soundness and composure of mind, but knowing that is it appointed for all delegated bodies once to die, and considering that the life of every such body is very uncertain, do make and ordain this our last will and testament in manner and form following. That says they were actually growing and they were doing well. They're not going to write this organization out of existence because it's failing. Is that not true?
That's true.
Wouldn't it be great if every religious body that was unauthorized would come together and write itself out of existence?
It sure would, but for that to happen, they'd have to be men who are honest.
That's right. And be willing to go back to the one church that we read about in the Bible.
One thing that these early restorers saw, they understood that as the law of Moses was the middle wall partition between the Jew and the Gentiles, that creeds were a middle wall partition between those who are desiring to follow Christ. And that to go back and to follow Christ, you had to do away with creeds and do away with denominationalism, thus the last will and testament of the Springfield Presbytery.
Paul, one of the things that amazes me in reading about the Restoration movement is how these men came to hate the creeds and the doctrines of men.
Well, they saw the division and they saw the harm that it caused. And I think most of all, they saw that it wasn't from God's Word.
That's right.
And let's read some of these items of this last will and testament of the Springfield Presbytery. And I think we can see, and also the people that will be watching this film, the attitudes, the mindset of these people as they were looking back to the Bible. Now notice this in item number 1. We will that this body die, be dissolved, and sink into union with the body of Christ at large. For there is but one body and one Spirit, even as we are called in one hope of our calling. Well, that's Ephesians chapter 4.
That's right.
And what were they saying? One church. There's only one hope. And they were putting to death the Springfield Presbytery for New Testament Christianity. That's what makes this document so important here in 1804. In fact, it was written in June the 28th of 1804.
Paul, what they were doing, like you say, here's the body of Christ. And they were taking that unscriptural body and saying, let's go back over here where we belong. Now, if all unscriptural bodies would do that, there wouldn't be but one body.
There wouldn't be the division. There wouldn't be the many creeds and doctrines of men today. There'd just simply be the doctrine of Christ. People looking back to the Bible and the Bible alone.
That's right. Let's continue. We will that our name of distinction with its reverent title be forgotten, that there be but one Lord over God's heritage and His name one. Let's not be known as the Springfield Presbytery. Let's be known as Christians, God's people, and let's let God be over His heritage. That was their thought.
That, and also doing away with titles given to men, such as reverend.
That's right.
I think this is very significant here, that they understood from reading the Bible, because that's where they had to get it at. It wasn't from reading man-made literature. They read the man-made literature and saw that it wasn't from the Bible. But they read from the Bible and saw that Christians should not be wearing titles such as reverend. I just wish that there'd be more today that could have this type of attitude.
That's right. Look in the phone book, holy, right, reverend, so-and-so. Well, like I say, it's not biblical. They knew it.
They understood it.
Won't you read another item for us?
We will that a power of our making laws for the government of the church and executing them by delegated authority forever cease, that the people may have free course to the Bible and adopt the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus. Certainly, Wesley, we can see here that these people, Marshall, Dunleavy, McNamara, Stone, Thompson, and Provines, They understood that they had no authority to make laws for the church. And this is what this item is talking about here, that they are putting to death this presbytery, that they are putting to death the idea of making laws for the church.
Paul, anytime anybody adds a law to God's Word, it's wrong, it's sinful. Or if they take a law of God out, that's sinful. And it's great that these men came to realize we can't speak for God. Let God speak for Himself. And that was the thought here.
Let's look at this next one, Wesley, and see what they had to say.
We will that candidates for the gospel ministry henceforth study the Holy Scriptures with fervent prayer and obtain license from God to preach the simple gospel, with the Holy Ghost sent down from heaven, without any mixture of philosophy, vain deceit, traditions of men, or the rudiments of the world. And let none henceforth take this honor to himself, but he that is called of God, as was Aaron. Paul, they're trying to decide, how can we determine who has a right to preach? Well, what it has been is something like this. You can preach if you'll endorse the Westminster Confession of Faith or another confession. Now they're saying, why don't we let candidates for the gospel ministry obtain a license from God? And this comes simply through a study of God's Word. And let's not mix that with philosophy, vain deceit, traditions of men, or the rudiments of the world.
Yeah. That's definitely part of the Presbyterian background, because they had licensed preachers before they were ordained. And that's what Stone was before he came here. He was licensed to preach, but he wasn't ordained. In other words, you couldn't preach in a Presbyterian church unless you received license to preach and then ordination. They're saying, let's do away with that. Let each group of Christians license their own preacher. In other words, get their license from God. See how faithful he is and see if he's preaching God's Word. And if he's not preaching God's Word, don't listen to him. But if he is, listen to what he has to say.
Right. And even today, Paul, I know you've had this happen to you probably. I've had it happen to me. Are you ordained?
No, no.
See, some people come up and still ask that kind of question because they cannot get behind the creeds and the doctrines of men and go all the way back to the Bible. That's what these men were trying to do. It's what we've got to do.
Well, you know, Paul wasn't ordained.
That's right.
Peter and John and Timothy wasn't ordained. But they took their orders from the Lord.
That's right.
Well, we can take our orders from the Lord today if we just simply take His book, preach and teach it. And this is all the license and all that we need.
Didn't He tell you to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature?
Yes, He did.
That's good enough, isn't it?
That's it. Let's look at the next one here. We will that the Church of Christ resume her native right of internal government. Try her candidates for the ministry as to their soundness in the faith, acquaintance with experimental religion, gravity and aptness to teach, admit no other proof of their authority but Christ speaking in them. We will that the Church of Christ look to the Lord of the harvest to send forth laborers into His harvest, and that she resume her primitive right of trying those who say they are apostles and are not. Certainly, with that last sentence there, it makes us think about 1 John chapter 4 and verse 1, when John says, brethren, try the spirits to see whether they are of God. And this is basically what they're saying here, that they're saying, let's get the church back. Let her try the ones that's doing the preaching and teaching. In other words, examine the Scriptures. Be like those of Berea. Search the Scriptures. And if someone's not preaching the truth, then they're false teachers. They're false, and not to be listening to them. I think it's important that people have this mindset today.
That's right, Paul. You know, if you look at that closely, it looks like they're trying to move back to local autonomy. Let us try these people. And the next point really gets into that. And we can see the direction in which they were moving. We will that each particular church as a body, actuated by the same Spirit, choose her own preacher and support him by free will offering, without a written call or subscription, admit members, remove offenses, never henceforth delegate her right of government to any man or set of men whatever. Local autonomy. Let us hire our preacher. Let us decide what to pay him. Let us take care of our offenses. If there's somebody here that's doing something unscriptural, we'll deal with it. When I was in the Church of God of Prophecy, Paul, we had to go to Cleveland, Tennessee, and find out if we could keep our preacher. Well, where do you find that in the Bible? That's not in the Bible. These men realized here that's not right. Do you know what happened to them? The headquarters at Cleveland, Tennessee finally sold that building out from under the members against their protest. Now they're saying, let's not do that. Let's let each congregation, in essence, start making her own decisions.
Well, certainly the autonomy of each congregation, that these men had that in mind. And I think it's important that each congregation look unto the Lord and not having an umbrella effect of a denominational home office as the Church of God of Prophecy or as the Methodist Church. I grew up going to the Methodist Church, and every once in a while they just change preachers. That if you like the one you had, well, if it's time to change, there's nothing you can do about it. They changed them. Well, let's see this next item here. We will that the people henceforth take the Bible as the only sure guide to heaven. And as many as are offended with other books which stand in competition with it, they cast them into fire if they choose, for it is better to enter into life having one book than having many to be cast into hell.
That's great.
It sure is. Well, if you think about in a few years from this setting here, that Thomas Campbell is going to coin the phrase, speaking where the Bible speaks. Well, basically they're saying the same thing here.
Right.
Let's just go back and speak as the oracles of God. Let's pick up the book and do away with these creed books, do away with these other books. And these other books are offensive to people anyway. Let's just go back and follow the Bible.
You know, you quoted Peter a moment ago, if any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. That's what they're saying. Let's cast all these creed books into a fire, take the Bible, let's go to heaven. I've often said this, Paul, and I'm sure you'll agree. If I never get a man or a woman in the Bible, I got them. And that's where we're trying to get people, is in the Word of God. And if we get them there, then the Lord's got them right where He wants them. And that's what they were trying to do. Next item. We will that preachers cultivate a spirit of mutual forbearance. Pray more, dispute less, while they behold the signs of the times. Look up and confidently expect that redemption draweth nigh. They saw all this fighting, and they thought praying more and fighting less would be a greater solution to the problem. What they got to understand is division is wrong. It's sinful. 1 Corinthians 1:10. But there's a right time to stand up and fight. And they had begun that process. And not only that, they were probably a little confused here. They probably thought signs led to this or the other. But Paul, they're trying to work their way out of this mess.
See, that's the thing, and especially this about the signs, because as we went back to the Cane Ridge Revival with the different exercises and the barks and the shakes and the things that they had. See, Stone didn't know. He thought maybe that was a sign from God or something. And at this point, they're reading their way out of denominational error, and they're trying to get back to the Bible. It's still going to be a few years from this point here that Stone and the congregation here at Cane Ridge are going to see that they're going to have to be baptized for the remission of sins over here in Stoner Creek. See, we're a few years from that, so we want to commend them for their good ideas of pointing people back to the Bible, but we don't want to condemn them because at this point they make a statement that might not be exactly correct or be correct, but yet we can see where they're standing at. Now, I just wonder at times how many of us, if we were put into that situation, brought up into denominationalism, not being taught New Testament Christianity, the autonomy of the church, the one church, the plan of salvation, if we just sat down and shed all this denominational dogma that these people grew up with and then come out with the truth. I hope to say that we could, but you never know.
That's right. For them, it's like coming out of a dark tunnel. And they had begun to see the light at the end, but they're trying to put all this together, and they're doing a pretty good job.
They sure are. Let's see what the next item is. We will that our weak brethren, who may have been wishing to make the presbytery of Springfield their king, and want not that is now become of it, betake themselves to the Rock of Ages and follow Jesus for the future. Certainly, Wesley, there's a tremendous statement made here in doing away with denominationalism. There are so many people today, and I know as we both go out and study the Scriptures with folks in home Bible studies, that sometimes it's very hard to get people to see the error of denominationalism or the denomination they in. Well, they grew up in it, their parents grew up in it, their grandparents grew up in it. Well, these people here grew up in the Presbyterian Church in 1803 when they formed the Springfield Presbytery. And then a year later, as we're writing this, they realized that that was wrong. That instead of following denomination, follow Christ. And if you follow Christ, then you go back to following that one body that they've been talking about here in this last will and testament of the Springfield Presbytery.
That's right. And those who saw it growing and thought, boy, this is great. And then all of a sudden they write it out of existence and they say, now what shall we do? Then they're saying, go to the Rock of Ages. That's a great thought. Look at the next item. We will that the Synod of Kentucky examine every member who may be suspected of having departed from the confession of faith, and suspend every such suspected heretic immediately, in order that the oppressed may go free and taste the sweets of gospel liberty. Boy, do you think about that thought? Here they're saying, now to the Synod of Kentucky, you think some of your people have departed from the creed book? Examine them. Try them. Kick them out so that they can go back to the Word of God and be set free.
You can almost see maybe a grin on their face in penning this or in thinking about this, how that the synod was like this terror hanging over people. You do what I say or we're going to put you out. And they said, put them out. Because we're going to take them back to the Bible.
That's right.
Let's look at this next one. Finally, we will that our sister bodies read their Bibles carefully, that they may see their fate there determined and prepare for death before it is too late. In other words, read the Bible, do what it says, because in doing that, that's the only way you're going to be able to prepare for death. And then it says here, the Springfield Presbytery, June the 18th of 1804, Robert Marshall, John Dunleavy, Richard McNamara, Barton W. Stone, John Thompson, David Provines.
You know, as I think about all of this, and I think about Barton Stone, his efforts, he had many disappointments. Discouraged from time to time. His first wife's buried right out here. She died 1810. Now these men have signed this. Did he become discouraged with some of these men? If so, why? Certainly.
In fact, if you look at each one of these, there are 6, and there were 5 that were put out of the Presbyterian Church. David Provines never was put out as a Presbyterian preacher because he was never a Presbyterian preacher. He was a candidate. But he was part of the Springfield Presbytery. But these 6 men signed these. There's only one that stayed loyal with Stone, and that was David Provines. In fact, if you look at John Dunleavy and Richard McNamara, they went into Shakerism. A lot of people don't realize that religion itself, Shakerism, it had a great effect upon the Restoration movement. And what it was, these men saw the emotionalism of the revivals and things. And certainly they went right into Shakerism. So those two fell away very quickly. And then Robert Marshall and John Thompson, well, they turned back. After reading this, after signing this, went back into the Presbyterian Church. Well, you know the Bible teaches us something about that. Jesus teaches us about that in the parable of the sower. That sometimes the seed is going to fall on rocky ground and stony ground and on the wayside, and sometimes it's going to start on good, fertile ground. But if you look at these here, there's only 2 out of the 6. 2 good, fertile hearts that have stayed with.
It is well with my soul. With my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul.
This is the home of J.W. McGarvey, McGarvey moved here after his home near Ashland burnt down. McGarvey lived here while teaching in the College of the Bible. He was a professor there. To the left of McGarvey lived Mark Collins. Mark Collins followed McGarvey at the Broadway Christian Church, and Mark was preaching there when the Broadway Christian Church burned to the ground. And then on the other side of McGarvey lived I.B. Grubbs. I.B. Grubbs was also a professor in the College of the Bible. Grubbs and McGarvey had a little bet going, as it were, on who was going to die first. Well, McGarvey died in 1911, Grubbs 1912. Now we want to go to the Broadway Christian Church where William McGarvey used to preach. This building was built in 1917. A beautiful structure, but now this is not the building where William McGarvey preached. The building in which William McGarvey preached burned to the ground. $50,000 worth of damage done to this great structure. It is said that Mark Collins, who was preaching for the Broadway Christian Church at that time, was told about the fire. And he came down and had to watch the structure burn to the ground. Here is a photograph of the building that McGarvey would actually have preached in. And you see the crowd there, a huge crowd that would have attended the Broadway Christian Church at the time that McGarvey was there. Now we see the inside of this beautiful structure. Again, let me remind you, this is not the building in which McGarvey would have preached. Up front, you see a huge pipe organ. The bottom line is there's no Bible authority for the use of instrumental music. The Bible says, speaking to yourselves in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord.
And there'll be no tears in heaven, there's no tears, no tears.
You're now looking at the gate of the Lexington Cemetery. Now, right after you go through the gate here, stop at the office. Ask them for a map of where the restoration men are buried, and they'll be glad to give you one. If you're in Lexington, Kentucky, looking for the Lexington Cemetery, drive down Main Street and look up, and you'll see the huge monument of Henry Clay. Henry Clay was a great statesman, a great orator, and he ran for the presidency of the United States of America 3 times. In 1824, 1832, and 1844. And all 3 times he was defeated. Henry Clay died in 1852. They put him on a train from Washington, D.C., that's where he died, and it took them 10 days to make it to Lexington, Kentucky. Why? Because they would stop and allow fellow Americans all along the way to pay their final respects. Finally, he made it here to Lexington, Kentucky. They took him over to his home at Ashland. Then the funeral service was had. After the funeral service, some of the men said, hey, this man needs to be honored. So they thought, how can we honor him? And so they decided we need a monument. Well, they started looking for a design. Julius Adams of this very city came up with the design. And then a Major Lewinsky, he was the one who was going to be in charge of building it. In 1857, the first cornerstone was laid. Estimated cost, $43,000. By the time they got through, $58,000 had been spent on this great monument. Now keep in mind that Henry Clay died in 1852, but he wasn't buried here then. He was not buried here until his wife died in 1864. And you can look through the gates here and you can see the burial site of both of them. And this is here to honor them. What is our interest in all of this? Well, Henry Clay was a very close friend to Alexander Campbell. And when Campbell was going to debate Rice, Henry Clay moderated. And so then that's the connection of Henry Clay with the Restoration movement. Alexander Campbell rubbed shoulders with great men, and Henry Clay was one of those men. We're sorry about the way the sunlight is hitting the marker here, but this is the grave marker of J.W. McGarvey. McGarvey was one of the richest scholars of his days. He wrote commentaries on the book of Acts, as a matter of fact, 2 of them. And also he wrote Lands of the Bible, Christian Evidences, the authorship of Deuteronomy. He was a professor in the College of the Bible. He was a great man in so many ways, and we're indebted to him richly. And so in 1911, we lost this great scholar. Now we want to go and see the grave marker of John Bowman. This is the grave marker of John T. Johnson. He and his family carried a lot of influence in Kentucky. Here's a man that was in the legislature, Congress. His brother Richard was the 9th Vice President of the United States of America under Martin Van Buren. John T. Johnson was a man that helped promote unity between the Stone and the Campbell movements. John Raccoon Smith was born in Sullivan County, Tennessee. Here is a man that was not well educated, but a man that carried a lot of influence in the Restoration movement. It was said of him by Alexander Campbell, a college education would have destroyed this man. He was very instrumental in bringing together the Campbell and Stone forces. He made that great speech on unity at the old Hill Street Meeting House. This is the grave marker of Dr. L. L. Pinkerton. Here's a man that was a liberal. He did not believe in the inspired Word of God, that is, the inerrancy of it. He was the man that introduced instrumental music into the Restoration movement. He also was a man that promoted open fellowship. Every movement, I suppose, has to have a liberal. And L. L. Pinkerton was a liberal in the Restoration movement. This is the grave marker of Dr. Henry Hampton Halley. Halley wrote Halley's Handbook to the Bible, used by many preachers and students of the Word of God. Here we are at the grave marker of Robert Milligan. Milligan was an instructor in some of the colleges. Not only that, he was an author. He wrote Scheme of Redemption, used in schools of preaching like the Memphis School of Preaching. He wrote a great commentary on the book of Hebrews. He also wrote Reason and Revelation. Robert Milligan was a scholar for his day and did much in helping people come to a knowledge of truth. Next, we're going to go to the grave marker of I.B. Grubbs. Notice, if you will, many of the stones that we have seen seem to be for the affluent. These men, though some of them didn't have a whole lot in life, look at their grave markers. Quite impressive.
Their patiently the cross of grief or pain, leave to thy God to order and provide in every change. He faithful will remain.
From the Lexington Cemetery now, we want to go to the home of Moses Easterly Lard. He became an instructor in schools. He also edited the Large Quarterly. He wrote one of the deepest commentaries on the book of Romans that's ever been written. Moses Lard became a scholar. Right here's where he lived. He paid $6,000 for this beautiful piece of property and home.
When I've gone the last mile of this way, I will rest at the close of the day, and I know there are joys that...
When you get to Midway, go to Midway College, and then go up to the library. And there in the library, you'll see the famous melodeon that L.L. Pinkerton introduced into the Lord's church. L.L. Pinkerton said the singing was so bad there at the Christian church it'd even scare the rats off. So he thought the answer was to bring in instrumental music. Well, men like Adam Hibbler was opposed to it. So he took his Negro slave, helped him through the window. The Negro slave brought the melodeon out, gave it to Hibbler, and it stayed out for a little while, but it was reintroduced. This caused tremendous problems within the Restoration movement, has caused problems ever since, because there's no Bible authority for the employment of instrumental music in worship to God. Here you see one of the original buildings that was on the site. L.L. Pinkerton established the Kentucky Female Orphan School. And this is that structure. As a matter of fact, you can go behind the building and see a sign that speaks of the Kentucky Female Orphan School. And so the campus has grown. It's now known as Midway College. Near the Midway College is the Second Christian Church. When the Civil War broke out, L.L. Pinkerton, who by the way was a medical doctor, went to assist in helping those who were injured. Well, the members didn't appreciate it a little bit. And so when he returned, the Christian church where he once preached would not receive him. And so he had to go here and preach. Just as you get ready to turn in toward Midway College, you'll see a beautiful home. This home was the home of L.L. Pinkerton. It was built in 1843, and you can see it was a nice home for that day. It has been well kept and now serves as the home of the president of Midway College. It is known as the Pinkerton Rouse Place. This is Midway Christian Church where L.L. Pinkerton preached prior to the Civil War. You can notice by the date, it's not the original structure.
What joy 'twill be when he comes in glory by and by. We will have our robes all white as snow.
This is the site of the old Main Street building in Lexington, Kentucky, where the debate was had between Nathan L. Rice and Alexander Campbell. It was on Calvinism, and it was held in 1843. Henry Clay was the presiding moderator. Alexander Campbell did a beautiful job in exposing the terrible doctrine of Calvinism. We're leaving the site of the Campbell-Rice debate, and now we're at the site of the Second Church of Christ, established by John B. Bowman. Bowman got into trouble with McGarvey because of the direction of Kentucky University. Bowman wanted to take it one way, and McGarvey another. Well, also, the brethren fell out with Bowman, and he is basically expelled, so he came here and established this congregation. And since he was not in good standings with McGarvey, he did not make a go of it. All right, we're leaving the Second Church of Christ, and we want to go to the site of the Hill Street Church. This doesn't look like a whole lot right now. It's a parking lot. But this is the site of the old Hill Street Meeting House. It was here that the forces of Alexander Campbell and Barton Stone met, headed up by John Raccoon Smith and Barton W. Stone. It was John Raccoon Smith, who made that great speech here, let us not be new lights, old lights, camel lights, or stone lights. The Bible will give us all the light we need. And so from this parking lot went forth unity and a great force in trying to bring people back to the New Testament church. We're still in Lexington, Kentucky, as a matter of fact, down on Chestnut Street. It is here that I.B. Grubbs used to preach. When the Broad Street Church introduced instrumental music, where J.W. McGarvey used to preach, McGarvey and his wife had to leave. They came here. I.B. Grubbs, who was a next-door neighbor, friend, and brother, said this to McGarvey: "I'd rather have you anytime is all the aids that anybody could introduce into worship."
This is a production of World Video Bible School. To God be the glory.